Great. All right. I think that entire film is about half an hour long. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
29 minutes, something like that.
But I hope that gave you some sense of it. I think it's a fascinating film, in part because it's premised on the central question of does the bloody story need to be written in blood so that people will understand and be moved to action? Interesting question. I'd like to turn to our speakers here. You are both experts on stories, different kinds of stories. So I'd like to begin by asking you to tell us a bit about the kinds of stories you tell or study and how your work has brought you to focus on SGBV in the DRC. Do you want to go first, Lauren?
Sure. So as you heard earlier, I mainly write about sexualized violence in war. I started a journalism project for Gloria Steinem, the American feminist. But as I've written for foreign policy and other outlets, I've sort of broadened out and recognized that the issue of sexualized violence is so entwined with so many other problems, especially in a place like Congo. So what I thought I'd do, rather than talk too much about what I do, is read something. We don't have a Congolese woman up on the stage. And first I was just wondering if we have Congolese women in the audience, men? And men, I said, yes. First was women, then was men. Excellent, okay. And I don't know if any of you have heard of a woman named Nema Namadamu. She runs an organization called Maman Shuja in the east, in Bukavu. And I met Nema a few years ago through this email that was forwarded to me. So Nema was born with polio, and so she was disabled at a very young age. She actually says now that polio saved her life because it prevented her from being married off at a young age and having many, many children and not going to school. And instead she had a mother who carried her to school on her back every day, back and forth for as long as it took. So an American tabloid magazine approached her to do a profile of her. I'm not going to name the tabloid. It's a big one. And they said, but Nema, are you a rape victim? So this was her reply. In Congo, we don't use the word rape. We call it violence. For as women, we are raped 100 ways every day. Our dignity stripped, our value tarnished, our very personhood denied from the earliest age that we can be violenced throughout our lives without there being any consequence. Surely this reporter understands that the greatest defilement of one's person is not what is done to the body. It's not the physical damage, generally speaking, that takes your life. It's that you are eaten alive as if you are a thoughtless being and left to decompose in those life-stealing memories. That is the daily grind of most who are born a girl in Congo. Every day it is emphasized that they are only a girl, and as such must serve every male's whim. You can't sit where they're gathered. You can't speak when they're talking. And if you are violated by one of them, they will handle the matter amongst themselves. Gift for your father, and the debt is cleared. She's married off at 14 or 15 in trade for 2 cows, then raped every day until she's borne many sons. If she bears only daughters, he'll take another wife to show the first how despicable and unserviceable she is. If she dies, no problem. For 2 more cows, another wife can be bought. If the husband dies or is killed in the war, then prepare to be violenced by every visiting brother-in-law, uncle, and pastor. Have I ever been violenced? I didn't grow up in New York City, USA. I grew up in a remote area of eastern Congo dubbed by the UN as the worst place in the world to be a woman or girl. And my work isn't interviewing celebrities for a magazine. My work is to create heaven for my daughter in a place called hell. Truthfully yours, Nema.
Hard to go after that.
Yeah.
I also work on stories, and one of the things that I've been looking at is, for a long time now, I've been studying Francophone literature from the Congo, both Congos actually. And in recent times, I have been struck by how little attention we give stories by writers from the DRC about issues of human rights. And something that struck me was that I felt like all the stories I was reading were coming from the outside and not from the inside. Having been kind of studying these texts for quite a while, having been exposed to these authors in my studies and in person, I just realized at one point that I wanted to try to tell these stories again, or to bring attention to these stories so that they could be heard and read again. Some of them are old writers. Some of them are writers who are no longer with us, like Chikaya Utamsi, who wrote a lot about injustice and human rights violations during the Mobutu era. Some of them are writers who recently passed away, but who've been writing about specifically sexual violence against women, like Bolia Bayenga. And then there are new writers, like Marie-Louise Bibi-Shmumbe, who is it was her poem that was quoted in the film. So at the very end, when she says, public response, public, and then this culture of silence. So the whole film is kind of framed by Bibish. She goes by Bibish. Bibish's poetry. And Bibish just came out with her first novel called Samantha du Congo, Samantha from the Congo. I don't know if it's been translated yet. So one of the things that I've been doing is trying to discover these stories, go find them, and they're not always easy to find, especially written by women. And there are about 4 or 5 writers, Congolese writers, women writers, who are writing about these issues, but who are not getting a lot of circulation or publication or distribution. So one of my goals is to try to unearth these stories and let them be heard, to do, I think, exactly what you're doing, which is to kind of give voice to Congolese women who can speak for themselves, and to empower. And they're already empowering themselves, but to further empower the kind of work they're doing. And I think that's what the film, sorry, I keep pointing upwards, but that the Petna Andelico and his wife, Sherry Rivers Andelico, that's one of their goals with this film, was to kind of bring to the forefront somebody like Bibish's work, but also these women who are struggling every day in these kind of conditions, but fighting nonetheless, and to talk about these women who are struggling for their dignity in a context that is not easy to navigate in it by any means. So
I'm very conscious of the fact that, depending on who you talk to about when this phase of the conflict started and when the sexual violence kind of targeting women as a weapon of war became a big issue in the Congo, we are kind of more than 20 years into this as well. Since you two are experts on different kinds of stories, as you reflect back on the stories that you've seen about what's happening in the DRC, and I think it's fair to say too, I mean, the notion that sexual violence as a weapon of war is now one that's broadly accepted. It doesn't only apply in the DRC, but we're talking about the DRC tonight, so we need to focus there. What has been missing in those stories, or why haven't they been more effective? And the second part of that is, can you point to some better ways to tell the story that are making a difference?
Can I start? Yeah. I was speaking to Sita before this conference that I look back now on the work I've been doing for a number of years on rape as a weapon of war, not just in Congo. But, and I wonder sometimes if I've contributed to part of the problem of the way we conceive this at this point, of women as victims. I mean, I think we all read headlines, whether it's about, ISIS, sex slavery, or, the worst place in the world to be a woman, or, the rape capital of the world, and we just don't see humans anymore. We see kind of lascivious headlines, we see grandiose headlines. But I always felt as a journalist that I had to tell these stories, and there is kind of a restraint you have to find in terms of, how deeply do you describe the physical injuries, the fistula, the whatever the treatment was. But I think now in my career, I've started focusing more, and the reason I wanted to start off by reading that by Nema, focusing more on kind of women and the problems as they stretch across society. What happens in Congo is so deeply related to government corruption. The very fact, we were talking about this earlier, the very fact that the army and the police are so rarely paid means that they are ravaging towns and stealing everything. And it doesn't excuse rape, but it explains kind of the culture of violence, in addition to the militias that have come in from Rwanda and the war that's developed and the fighting over natural resources. But I do think that right now, personally, I've tried to start telling the stories of women who are working for change. Nema is one of them. And in fact, I'm working on a story kind of to see whether the narrative we're telling is really the situation on the ground these days. The war's been going on for so long. I don't think it's the same as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Things shift very quickly in Congo. And I spent time at Panzi Hospital, Dr. Mukwege's hospital in the East a couple months ago. You hear about thousands of women raped. He's done tens of thousands of surgeries on women raped. But in the last year, only one adult woman was operated on at Panzi. There were children operated on, which is a whole other issue and a horrifying one. But at the same time, I don't think that the Western media quite is telling the narrative as it now exists. And that's why I'm so interested in what Subha does, because I don't get to see a lot of Congolese writers out there. And I don't know exactly why that is, or if any of you do. But from where we sit in the US, I'm not seeing them.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, a lot of my work is unearthing them, because even among literary folks, people don't know about them. They're hard to access. We know writers of a different era. We are able to look at their writing from this kind of lens of time, but in terms of what's going on today, there's kind of this lack of really very little discussion, very little work on it. A film like Jazz Mama, which is really, to me, a very short film, but so powerful, because one of the things that Nandeliko decided he wanted to do was that he didn't want to tell the story of victimhood. And people said to him, "You need to make this film." He said, "I need to make this film. But how do I tell the story in a way that doesn't, once again, victimize these women and make them seem like these poor Congolese women who need our help? Because that's not the story I want to tell." And so apparently he went back and forth, and finally he came to the producer one and said, "The film I want to make is going to be about the banyo, the fabric." And I'm like, what? And really the opening scenes are all this beautiful, beautiful fabric. And the movie is beautiful. I mean, it's beautifully shot. I mean, he almost worked harder, it seems, at making a beautiful piece of art, because that's the story he wanted to say he wanted to tell about Congolese dignity and women.
But I will say, I get a little stuck, because it is horrifying there. I mean, every time I've been there, it's really horrifying what's happening. When I cited the one woman operated on, that's because the kind of rape is not quite as torturous. They're not using objects. It means fewer surgeries. It doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't 1,500 women raped that month in that part of the country. I mean, it's still horrendous. So I don't know. I struggle back and forth with how many of these stories am I supposed to be telling, and in what way to make people care.
Right. Well, Bolia Bayenga is another writer who just recently passed away, and he actually writes about rape in the Congo. One is a weapon of war. Also, he puts it in global context, so very similar to what you do, because he says we can't just think of Congo as the rape capital of the world and the rest of the world is fine. But also then, if you're looking at rape always in the context of war, we almost excuse it in the context of war. There's kind of this idea that, well, it's just a weapon of war, so it's just like everything else, and if we're okay with everything else, why aren't we okay with that?
Do you know the feminist Robin Morgan was the editor of Ms. Magazine, kind of from a different generation, I guess, than most of us here, but she says, if rape is a crime against humanity in war, then what is it in peacetime?
Right, and I think that's exactly the point, right? I mean, it's that somehow that has become a way to not address this issue. And in some ways, I mean, one of the things that I'm always confronted with is the statistics, as you were saying. There's all these statistics, there's these numbers. We don't even know if they're accurate. Often we're told that they're not.
But also it's not just about war rape in Congo. Researchers have found that even when the fighting ends, in one particular area they measured, rape increased 17-fold once the fighting ended. Right. Because men are so traumatized, they're so used to committing violence, they take it home with them. There's no rehabilitation or reintegration. So rape is still on the rise, but is it related to the war? Everything in Congo, you could argue, is war-related at this point. But that's, I guess, a debatable kind of thing to say.
Sure, when's the line that you draw between? And also after the Rwanda genocide and the mass kind of exodus towards the Congo, that period is often known as like one of the worst in terms of rape that was going on, right? I mean, so it's just this contact with these people and the sense that they were violating the land by coming over, and so now women were going to be raped. So I mean, even that is kind of, is it wartime rape? Is it not? You know, that line becomes very
And that
blurry.
phenomenon of violence against women going up after conflict
Right.
has officially ended is, again, it's not just the DRC, it happened in Liberia, it
Right.
happened in Rwanda, it happened in Serbia.
Sudan.
But I also think it's important to note that it's not just about what I said, which is trauma and lack of reintegration and rehabilitation, and it's attitudes towards women. It's a misogynist society. When you walk around Eastern Congo, you see women carrying the heaviest loads of everything you've ever seen on their heads. Men don't do that heavy work. At mines, women are the ones carrying the heaviest stones up and down the hills. It's really an imbalanced society. Often you see women stuck with 5 to 10 children, and the men are not home all day, and they're not working, and their alcoholism is a large problem. And I just think that needs to be acknowledged. This is not just about war. This is about a patriarchal, misogynist kind of issue that is still going on in Congo.
Right. The main character in the film, that woman whose daughter then says, "I love you" to the mother, she's one of those women where she's selling fabric at the market. She basically is running the entire family. I mean, the husband is never to be seen in the entire film. And there are lots of women like this who are basically responsible for the subsistence of their families' lives and who are working unbelievable hours, have lots of children.
And at the same time, we're not sent to school because
Right.
school fees, while guaranteed in the Constitution, school is supposed to be free in primary school. School fees are prohibitive, so families only send boys. Even now, today, that
Right.
still happens.
Right, and in this case, it was a woman who sends her daughter to school. That one daughter goes to school. She can't afford to send all of them, but she sends that one daughter, and that one daughter is so grateful. But then there's this kind of realization too that she goes to school only to realize how unequal things are, right, and how unfair things are. So it's kind of the tragedy of the education itself.
I'd like to just take a slightly different direction for a moment and pick up on something, Lauren, that you brought up when we were thinking about this conversation, and you were talking about a meeting you had with Julienne Lusenge, and how you kind of were so moved by a question that she asked you, why do you think the international community doesn't care about what's happening in the DRC?
So I don't know if you know who Julienne Lusenge is, but she's a very powerful Congolese activist who runs an organization. The acronym is SOFA PADI, and they work with survivors of sexual violence on a legal level, a medical level, a psychological level, and I've seen what they do firsthand, and it's pretty impressive. She also won the French Medal of Honor, Legion of Honor. And I just saw her in New York because she was getting another award from Amnesty. And this woman is one of the most tired human beings I've ever met because she just doesn't stop, and she is underfunded and overworked, and what she does is kind of endless. But she looked at me and she said, so why, I come here, why do you think that none of you care? Why do you think the international community does not care? And I would actually really, when we open up to the floor, I would love to hear what you have to say, because I puzzle over this. And I mean, my answer to her was, I think we've been saturated for so many years with horrible stories coming out of the African continent, not just Congo. It's very hard for us to take in more of them. Also, it is too foreign to most white Americans, to people in power. I mean, these are the only things I can come up with, because to me, I don't understand when you're talking about the stories I'm reporting on. Just the other day, I published a piece in Foreign Policy about, what reparations are, like money paid out to rape victims. There has never been a single dollar paid to a single rape victim in Congo, despite multiple court orders. There was one case that was supposedly paid out this year to 29 women who were raped. They were owed $155,000, and the money was paid out to 29 of the wrong women in a case of fraud, where a man posed as their lawyer, brought 29 fake women with him to Kinshasa. None of them had IDs. That didn't seem to matter. Handed them the money, and the money was gone. In the meantime, President Kabila gave $2.1 million in cars to the national soccer team. In the meantime, the Office on Sexual Violence and Conflict is hiring Washington PR firms for tens of thousands of dollars a month for a year at a time. So the hypocrisy is really shocking, and I try to point that out in my stories. You know, we should care because look at this, like this is shocking, and yet it falls relatively flat. It's rare for those stories to get a lot of kind of traction, and I can't quite figure it out. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think, I don't know what the answer is to that either. I think there's definitely a sense of desensitization to just those words, Africa, violence. Yeah.
Julian's son was also with me at lunch, and her son was about 26-year-old, and he goes, do you think it's because so many of us just keep dying in Congo? He's like, because there's just too many dead people all the time? And I was like, maybe. I mean, maybe that's getting to the point in the bluntest way possible, right?
Right, yeah. And a history of that's been going on for so long, that a sense that things are not changing, and so there's not this sense of, you know, things are improving, or there can be anything. You know, it's almost like that heart of darkness narrative that I hate, but that always comes back. It rears its ugly head, you know.
I always like to say, you know, if you had the U.S. Army, I live in Brooklyn, right, rampaging through Brooklyn and coming through houses and raping women, like, we wouldn't just be sitting here, like, turning the newspaper page like we didn't care. So to me, it's still shocking that as humans, like, we don't care enough about our fellow humans. Like, I cannot wrap my head around it. But it does come down to geopolitics and how much the U.S. supports Congo, supports Rwanda, like what is happening at a political level, beyond like those of us who can care and make a difference on kind of a lower level.
Yeah.
Two more questions from me while I still have the stage before we open it up to everybody else. Who is the audience for these stories? I heard a very powerful presentation by one of my colleagues at Emory University a couple weeks ago, who was very critical about the global regime of human rights, and felt that human rights is about culture change, and all culture change is local and happens at the grassroots level. And so as long as we treat human rights like it's up here at 30,000 feet at a global level, we're never going to be changing the situation of human rights for people at the grassroots level where it really matters. So in this particular case, who is the audience for a more nuanced, well-rounded, complex story about sexual violence in the DRC?
Well, I can talk about the Kavumu case. So the reason I went to Congo recently was to report on a number of stories, one of which is the ongoing rape of little girls in a town called Kavumu, near Bukavu in the east. And it's not your typical mass rape situation. It's been going on for 3 years now. A little girl, aged 18 months to 11 years old, gets taken out of her house, one girl at a time, during the night. Nobody wakes up. She's gang raped. She's either put back in her bed or left in a nearby field. And this has happened more than 40 times. I wrote about it a year ago for Foreign Policy magazine. You know, what the hell, everyone? Why is nobody stopping this? It's been 2 years. What is going on? And as I started calling around and asking questions of the government, they very nervously, kind of, you know, like chickens without heads, said, "Oh, we're gonna conduct a national investigation into this." And I thought, oh my God, like journalism can do something. Like this is amazing. So 6 months later, I kind of kept trying to follow up, like where is that national investigation? How's that going? And then 6 months later, I saw Dr. Mukwege in New York, and he said, "What national investigation?" So I decided to go back. And I was there in December and January, and I'm writing a big story for The Guardian because I want it to be out there as big as possible, because it's really very, very deeply upsetting that nobody has done anything to stop this. But there are developments I'm waiting on so that I can publish. I can't talk about why. And in the meantime, 2 more little girls have been raped. Arguably, one of the main witnesses has been shot and killed. It's unclear if that's exactly what happened. But it literally comes down to a lack of, is it indifference? A lack of resources? I mean, there are so many things happening to allow this to continue, that it's utterly shocking. And the fact that like I had to finally go back to Congo and make these, like I'm hoping the next article can actually do the next level of things. But why does it take this from over in New York? Why does it have to take this? I don't know.
Subha, do you want to reflect on that?
Well, I think I agree with this speaker you're mentioning, just in terms of grassroots efforts and things that have to be on the local level. Clearly, that's the only place where change is happening, if it's coming at all. We don't hear about this, and it takes a lot of work for me to even uncover those places. But they are happening, and there are movements. I mean, Nima is one of them who's working very hard. There's a whole Yole Africa movement that's working with little girls and actually trying to educate girls and educate girls about what can happen to them and their bodies. I mean, it's education on many levels, you know. To me, but at the same time, I think we need that discourse too. You know, I mean, there has to be a
International
discourse
pressure of some kind.
and of caring, of compassion, kind of an international discourse of compassion, regardless of whether it's heard or not. We need it, right?
But I honestly think like the grassroots level stuff, like a woman like Julienne Lusenge, who's doing this unbelievable work with almost no money, getting recognition, but nobody's giving her resources. This investigation in Kavumu has been given no resources by the government.
Right.
The investigators have been trained by Western NGOs and the UN, not the government. So it's interesting because there are amazing people doing local amazing work with almost nothing. So it has to be partnered with either pressure from the outside or funding from the outside.
And when they do, when I find out about them, it's because they come over to the U.S. or they send someone over to the U.S. to reach out to a university, and often they'll call me, and they'll say, "Hey, you work on the Congo, can you help us?"
But then they're not even getting what they need. Sitting at lunch with some of these women doing this great work, they're like, we're really running dry, and the organizations here tell us we're sorry, we have other things we need to fund.
Because a lot of what they need is funds, that they need our needs, and also people. I mean, that's the.
And one of the women I just spoke to said, we just lost our top lawyer because we can't pay her anymore.
Right, right, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I open it to the audience at
Yeah,
this point?
please
I'm
do.
sure there are a lot of questions. Please.
I want to thank you for what you're doing and enlightening. I know a lot about Africa. I've read about South Africa being the rape capital.
It's a lot of debate about which is the rape capital.
It goes back and forth.
Thank you. Rape in Sudan, rape in Haiti, but this is the first time that I'm hearing about rape in the DR. So my question is, I know that there's ongoing war in DRC, but why the DRC?
Why is the war continuing?
Why specifically the rape is endemic in the DRC?
Well, what happened was in 1996, after the 94 genocide in Rwanda, the genocidaires fled into Congo. There were mass movements of refugees, and basically the war just sort of carried over. Rape was used in the Rwandan genocide. About 250 to 500,000 women were raped in 3 months. When 800,000 people were killed, that's how many women were also raped. So it's the same, the Hutus moving over, they're taking that mentality. I just think in that part of the world it's the world's cheapest, most effective weapon. And in a society where you don't have a lot of weapons and you're using machetes to hack people's bodies apart, you can use rape very effectively to terrorize people off their land. Whether it's to get everyone out of a village, whether it's to gain access to a mine. I just think that there's so many reasons to use it. Also, I think it's I think someone here said it, it's not so much an honor culture in Congo like the way it is in Syria or Libya where women are so prized, and this is something that infuriates me because I feel like if we didn't worry so much about women's purity, then they wouldn't be such a target and such an available target to humiliate the men and like ruin the family. But I do think that it does have some play in a place like Congo where women sort of belong to men in a way. So I think that you're able to tear an entire family and community apart once you violate the women.
Hi, my name is Ndona, and I'm Congolese by my dad. I'm also from New York, from Harlem. But I'm here because I do have a number of questions as it relates to what you stated, Lauren Wolfe, regarding marriage, identity of the woman, sexuality, and physical abuse. So I am in the process of divorcing a Congolese man, who, yeah, whatever. But I do want to reiterate that there are some issues as it relates to hypocrisy in the society, where a number of people mentioned, why is it not spoken about? Why is it that it takes the international community to get involved in order for things to change? A lot of that has to do with the fact that it's stigmatized. You're not allowed to speak about what happens to you personally. Even though things may not be perfect, you do not speak of it. Though it is not a society where it's like the Islamic societies where women, are prized to that level, but it's a shame for a man, for his wife to be raped. Whereas the woman would then be stigmatized, and the husband at the same time would no longer want to be with his wife. And it's not always just the actual physical act. It can also be if a woman is seen spending too much time with a man who's not her husband, or looking at a man too long who's not her husband. So there are a number of variables that come into play as to why it is not so openly discussed within the Congolese community. And then also the issues where you had mentioned also the marriage at very early ages. And that's not something that started during the war. That's something that's been, historical. Or I even have a friend of mine whose mother was proposed marriage at the age of 9, but her father didn't allow it. He wanted to wait just a couple more years. But I can say that there are some amazing things in the Congolese culture and the traditions, but unfortunately, some of the things that are taking place right now overshadow the positive aspects of the society. So, the fact that we're here tonight, and there aren't that many Congolese women here. I know there are a few of us that are here, but I really wish there were a lot more. But it also has to do with the fact that not many people want to talk about it.
Right.
Because in the culture, if a woman is raped, you're often blamed. You're taught that if it does happen to you, then there's something that you did to make it happen.
Can I just add on the positive side of things? I've met amazing Congolese men. I mean, I've met men, a man whose daughter was raped, and he has no shame. All he wants is for her to be well and the family to be well and to find the perpetrator. This is certainly, just to be clear, I can't speak in generalities across Congolese men, but I've read a lot of studies, and these are some of my experiences. So.
Oh yeah, there are tons of amazing Congolese men, tons of them.
Did we have, you want to go over here while you have the microphone over there?
Thank you.
Then we'll come to you over here.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Lydia Kayembe. I'm Congolese, and I want to thank you for coming to Alliance Française to actually bring this topic because it's not often discussed in the media. And it's definitely an issue that predates the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. So when we talk about the Mobutu era, we can back like the 80s, 70s, and 60s, and will still be cases, actually several, not just cases, but more like an epidemic of gender-based violence in the Congo. So first, thank you really for bringing this topic here tonight. I have a comment and then a question. So the comment is, I definitely agree that Kivu is definitely a good definition of hell on earth. However, describing the Congo in general as capital, rape capital of the world and definitely a big exaggeration. I mean, I go to the Congo very often, to Likasi, Lumumbashi, Kinshasa, and I walk as freely as I walk here because it's not a war zone. It's the biggest country in Africa, so the whole country is not a war zone.
Can
there
I
are
just clarify
bits
that
and pieces.
statement, because we keep talking about it. It was said by Margot Wallström, who is now the Swedish foreign minister. It has gotten a lot of heat one way or the other, and I actually agree with you that we can debate, like, the rape capital of the world is moving every day as far as I'm concerned, but I totally agree.
Okay, great. And then my question to you is, I work in global public health, and one of the topics I work on is HIV/AIDS, so we definitely link this to gender-based violence. So even though we can address a lot of topics with civil societies and ministries of health regarding some taboo topics such as homosexuality and HIV/AIDS, it's always a challenge to address this gender-based violence, and I would want to know your comment on this, or like what can be done to deal with the ministries of health or various organizations there regarding this.
What was the last part? Sorry, to deal with.
Gender-based violence.
To deal with
I've seen
how
some.
to get people to
Yeah,
deal with
I've
it
seen
and talk about
there
it.
are amazing groups of men working with men on masculinities in Congo, where they go to a village and they sit down and they talk about these issues. But it's very, very slow work. I mean, it's one village by one village. You get the chief to sit down and talk, and then the next thing. I don't know. Do you have?
Yeah, and then as part of Yoli Africa, one of the things that they're doing is actually, and they've been doing this for over 10 years already, was taking young men, youth off the street, to this school, basically, where they were being taught to make films, to do journalism, to take photographs, painting, and to tell stories that way. And basically, I mean, one of the goals was just to give them something to do. But then the other thing was to actually tell their stories, and a lot of their stories are, like we saw with those kids, they're orphans, or they're on the streets, they have no link to their families. I mean, and violence is just what they do. What's interesting about what you saw in the film and with those two, and that was in Kinshasa actually, with those two young men, is that they were trying to rape the actress of the film. And she initially it was all just being filmed unbeknownst to them. The interview you saw at the end was because morally the filmmaker had an obligation to tell them they were being filmed, and suddenly they changed their story. Well, not both of them, one of them. One of them said, "Oh, I would never rape a woman without her consent," essentially is what he said. The other young man, if you notice, said nothing. But basically what they do is they steal, they pickpocket, and they rape women. I mean, that's partly what these young kids are doing. They're not doing anything. They're not working.
It comes down to government corruption, don't you think?
Right. I mean, well, yeah, it's a system. It's
In
a
the end,
system
there's
that-
no health care, there's
Right.
no free schooling, there's
Right.
no, I was detained by the Congolese security services a couple months ago, and I spent a day being interrogated, and then I find out halfway through, because I'm sort of interrogating them back for my own curiosity, they hadn't been paid in 3 months. The security services.
And I think it's really important what you said about this goes back all the way to Mobutu. I mean, it goes way, and it goes to colonial times too. I mean, this goes way, way back. Violence and violence against women, violence against children, which is also part of this. And so it's nothing new, for sure.
Can I ask you a question, actually? People in Congo love to tell me that until the Rwandans came, there was no word for rape. I don't even know if they mean Lingala, or I don't know what language they're even talking about. My assumption is that there was no word for a concept that was already existing. You know what I mean? The way we didn't talk about like raping your wife as rape until like the 70s, 80s, or even 90s in the US. Have you ever heard of this idea that there was no word? That's what I assume, right? I mean,
I just wanted to weigh in on your question as well. I haven't had an opportunity to work in the DRC, but we are a partnership between Emory University and the Carter Center, and we've done quite a bit of work in Liberia around gender-based violence issues. And one of the things that I definitely noticed over the years is that in the early days of 2006, when the so-called rape law was passed, and a lot of international organizations became very involved in Liberia. One of the naming and shaming seemed to be a kind of big part of the strategy, and there was a huge backlash around that. But things really started to change when organizations, civil society organizations, started reaching out to men to make them allies in men stopping violence kind of movements, and talking to men about why violence against women is a bad thing. And then I think it's changed even more. They have a mental health in Liberia program that has been going on for 5 years that trains community-based mental health workers, and dealing with issues of gender-based violence is kind of part of what they deal with. So it's been kind of taken into the health system in a way that it wasn't before, but I think also involving men as allies has been a real transformative moment.
Can I just add something to that, Sita? Just in terms of, I think there are stories too, like there's a play by Lynn Nottage called Ruined that actually contribute to continuing this discourse of women being ruined after rape. You know, that there's no life afterwards for women. And I feel that when we put these plays on and we celebrate them and we celebrate this as Congo, we sometimes end up inevitably not kind of reinforcing that same story.
But I have seen that story so many times. This is where I get stuck. I have met so many women who are ruined, and there is no rehabilitation for them, and there is no job for them. And it's, it doesn't have to be that way maybe, but it is the narrative for so many women there, not just there, around the world.
Right.
I think we had a question on this side of the room.
This man also.
Oh, we have many questions.
I actually have one comment and then two questions. You asked a question about why outsiders seem to not care about rape. And my opinion is that, just regarding America, that we already have issues with women's health, the lack of abortion clinics, or what happened with Planned Parenthood and the funding of that. So trying to get your head around your own country's issues and actually having a front for us, I think it's going to be hard for them to understand outside issues regarding women's health. The first question I have is there any statistics or data on sexual violence towards men and little boys?
I'm not remembering it right now, but there is data out there. But again, like Sita said, there are so many organizations that gather the statistics so differently. I've actually been working on gathering the most recent statistics about women. And you can look on UNFPA's website, sometimes has stats.
There's stats on children in the
UNICEF
DRC.
has also
And
stats on
children, and then they do categorize it by male and female. But I don't know how accurate it is, because with kids, I always wonder, how do they even...
I want to say 20%, but it might be higher.
There actually, there have been, I think over the last 2 years, a number of studies on this issue. And if you leave your contact information with me at the end, I'll try to get you some references.
Thank you. And my last question is, you talked about writing an article that's going to be the next level for The Guardian, that's going to be really big. What are you hoping will happen for that change? Because you said that you wanted to do something, and how would you want it to materialize?
I would like the world to see what the government has done and not done, and by allowing girl after girl after girl to be, quote, ruined. I mean, the way I spoke to these girls, and they say, I am destroyed, and I want the world to see that I have been destroyed. I want them to know what happened to me. So part of it is that I want to tell their stories because they deserve to have their stories told. But I also want the world to understand that the Congolese government has known this has been happening for years and has basically allowed it to happen. I think they have a lot of responsibility, despite not being the direct perpetrators. I think if you don't initiate an investigation, if you don't pour funding into this, then you are responsible in some ways.
Where's the
That man
microphone?
has been
Oh,
hand over.
sir.
I'm Joseph Nzikani. I'm originally from the Congo, but I live here. So thank you so much for Alliance, and thank you for Emory, and to organize this kind of conference. I think I have just observation, and I'll make my suggestion. The issue about rape in the Congo is a huge issue. I mean, now we're talking now 2016. This is the healing process. But 10, 15 years ago, it was a really shock. Because when I had so many questions here, people ask about, like, why we're not talking about rape in Congo. There's not only Congo, there's so many places, which is true. But when we're talking about rape, even the movie was nice. But the movie, I think for me, that's my point of view, it should be talking really about the rape inside the East part. I think you being in the East part, that's Kinshasa. Kinshasa is nothing. Kinshasa life is great. It's 2,000 miles away from where women are really raped as a mass rape. The reason this question is bringing attention for everybody because there was a massive rape. They used that as a weapon to destroy our dignity, our women, our people. And it's true. That's why we feel as a Congolese, the international community, they do nothing. Even though we have a UN mission, being in Congo is the biggest UN mission in the world, is in the Congo. 15 years ago, 2006, the budget of UN was 12 billion, and 1 billion was affecting the Congo. But inside, nothing really happened when it's coming really to the issue, to solve the issue about the women. We saw here, I live in Atlanta 15 years now. I witnessed like Sudan issues, how people, they bring awareness. No lately here with Boko Haram women. But in the Congo, nothing happened, like nothing. The women, they are useless. They are useless, really. So that's the big issue. That's why we feel like we like international community, they're not doing nothing. And we understood that. Why? Because they are stealing all the wealth, the riches in the Congo. And we know who's behind that. It's Rwanda. Everybody knows. If you ask any Congolese, we know who's behind. It's Rwanda. Kagame, when he come here, is welcome. He's welcome for everybody. He's the one we are sending the soldier. So that's really the biggest issue when we talk about rape. I'm glad we don't have that much Congolese here. Because the Congolese women, even here, they are really shocked. It's something, we know that. And we know one day we're going to solve it in our way. Because we look like we are left over. Nobody cares about what's going on in Congo. Really, that's really the biggest issue. The women, they are useless. A month ago, I met a woman who came here. She came from Congo. There was a symposium here. They were talking also about all those issues. That girl, when she told you the story, I met her personally. I don't know her, but I met her. She's from my country. She was raped in front of her parents. Sometimes they make the parent, your daddy, to rape your daughter, your wife, the child. Those are the issues you need to bring to attention. People understand why they're talking about rape in the Congo. It's not just like a regular rape here, because here we have also rape here in the USA. They talk about a movie, but it's not the same kind of rape is going on in the Congo. So the issue is really, don't take that issue, it's a big issue. And we know that it's a wounded in all the Congolese about what's going on in Congo. And we know who's behind all those. So what I'm gonna just ask, if we can team up with us, we have a Congolese community here. We talk about those issues. We know exactly. We have also solution. We can also help. For you guys, you can be our voices. For those, we can also help to solve really the issue. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a woman here who's had her hand up for a while.
Hi, I have a couple statements. I want to ask you ladies if you're familiar with the film that I'm about to describe. I cannot, it's been a few years ago, I cannot remember the country in which it was happening. It was one of the countries in Africa, the same story here. They were involved in nonstop war, horrific rapes, and the women said enough.
Pray the devil back to hell.
Yes.
Liberia. That was about
Yes.
Liberia.
And staged a sit-in. And so, my next question is, what's being done to, empower the women themselves? Because the truth of the matter is, human beings pick on weaker human beings. They always have, they always will. Women pick on weaker women. I'm just talking about generally. In war, people do horrific things. They always have. And we're talking about, the soldiers in the Congo, but I'm sorry, the U.S. military have done some of the same things. But you won't hear about it. You won't hear about all of it. They can't keep all of those stories hushed. That's why.
I have been trying to write about this for a long time, I swear to you.
Okay. The goal of militaries around the world is to teach men to be killers, to have no regard for humaneness. it doesn't affect everybody the same way. In fact, I don't know if you're aware, I read, I'm a filmmaker, and I was going to make a story about the psychology of killing, because I read an interesting book where in World War I, they did, the U.S. military did a study on the kill ratio of U.S. soldiers, and what they came up with was that nobody was a good shot. I mean, what the ratio was, it was horrific in terms as for the number of bullets that shot, there were very little hits. And they determined that human beings by themselves didn't want to kill each other. So they had to actually change their training methods to get people to kill. Okay, so it worked. But warfare has been horrific ages throughout. Since we know this, it seems to me the most effective way is to find some way to change the mindset of the women to somehow protect themselves.
And there are groups doing this.
And the reason, because, you know, we may not want to admit this, but, you know, rapes happen because they can. Because they can. And there is very little consequence for it. It wasn't much consequence.
Do you have a question that you want to ask?
I just asked it. I said, what is being done to change the mindset of the victims or the women who aren't victims yet to, to
You're not touching
protect
that one?
themselves?
Okay.
Well, I'm actually, a lot of my, the network of scholars that I'm working with who are interested in this subject are actually looking exactly at that. They're looking at the stories that are being retold. They're looking at this whole Yole Africa. One of the things they do is they're making videos of women's lives in the Congo, and exactly for that. Now, what's really interesting is that they're all women of a certain age. So they're not younger women who are offering to tell their stories. So they're a little older, they're mothers, and they're telling their stories of just survival and empowerment. I have another colleague at the University of Wisconsin who's working on like women who are making fabric, and in the fabric they're telling their stories. And they're encouraging women to tell stories of rape, stories of violence in the fabric. I mean, which always has been done. Stories have always been told in fabric, but now she's actually encouraging them to tell their stories of violence. So I do think this is happening, but you know, most people don't know about it. I mean, you have to go looking for it.
Well, and I would say too that at a global policy level, I think there's, you know, the idea that rape is just something that happens that's an unfortunate, you know, kind of outcome of war. That has really changed. I mean, rape is now recognized as a weapon of war.
A war crime, a crime against humanity.
A war crime, a crime against humanity that can be prosecuted. I think there's broad recognition that women's physical security is part of a broader kind of peace and security frameworks that need to be dealt with. If you look at things like UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, that women need to be not only protected but included at every stage in peace negotiations and demobilization and kind of post-conflict rebuilding. So I think these things are changing.
On the other hand, we have this rhetoric, but on the other hand, you know, like there's the move to end sex trafficking, but it doesn't stop the U.S.'s role is itself in the act of sex trafficking, which is combined with gun running, drug trafficking, and sex trafficking. They all go together.
And pornography.
Okay, so on one hand we have the rhetoric, but on the other hand we have the government's involvement. So
Yeah, I'm not saying there's no contradictions,
yeah.
but
no, and it's on the ground versus also kind of policy, right? And
Congo itself has actually got two justice systems going, a military justice system and a civilian justice system. And the civilian justice system is useless. The military courts have begun to convict rape as a weapon of war, finally. Finally, there is movement, there is change at a legal level, and that is because of the grassroots activists, that is because of the women's groups who are pushing for this. It's because of years of work. So there is movement, even within the country.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, so I'm Subha Xavier, and I wrote my thesis about sexual violence in Congo. When I was doing my research, I found that there are a lot of nonprofit organizations in Eastern Congo, and most of these nonprofit organizations, they've kind of taken...
What organization?
I've written about the Congo, my thesis, and I found that in Eastern Congo, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations, both local and international. And some of these nonprofit organizations, they've taken the role of the government. Do you think these nonprofit organizations, they're hindering the government from taking the responsibility of what's happening in Eastern Congo? Because that was my question in my thesis.
Wow, that's
I don't think that
big
the government of Congo is about to step up if they leave. So
Yeah, because they say they completely given up authority in Eastern Congo, so the nonprofit
I don't think they
organization
want it.
became a safe haven for the victims.
do any of the Congolese people in the room disagree? I don't think Kinshasa wants that responsibility. I think they're profiting nicely from what's happening in the East.
Okay, at this point, I'm not going to end the conversation. I'm going to invite you to continue the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AFBell16. I think we can continue kind of for quite a while, so please share your thoughts using that hashtag. And now, at this point, I hope please join me in thanking our sponsors this evening and also our two wonderful speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.